Welcome back out on the mushroom trail. It's an absolutely beautiful late summer day out here in the mossy forests of the foothills of the Cascades. Let's jump into this forest. Let's see what we see. So take a look right down here on this old hemlock log. We've got a prime example of what's commonly referred to as the West Coast Reishi, Ganoderma oregonense. And this one it's got a little layer of spores up top, but notice that it's soft to the touch. In fact, if I take this white outer margin and just lightly press with my finger, look at that, leaves an indentation or a mark. Now this conk, unlike a lot of the other conks out here, is annual. So this is going to grow each year and then it's going to waste away. Whereas if I look just down here, we've got this small familiar site. Notice that we've got little beads of guttation or sweat coming off of this mushroom, and it's firm or hard to the touch. This is the red-belted conk, Fomitopsis mounceae. So notice that we've got both growing in close proximity, both look relatively similar, but this is really the one that we're after. And these nice young fruiting bodies offer an interesting opportunity. So I'll oftentimes actually trim the outer margin. Look at that. So these are actually the spores that have kicked up from underneath. Notice they look a little bit like cocoa powder. Underneath we see this varnished layer. In the back here you may be able to detect this bright red color. So these will be bright red at the base, then orange and yellowish and white even on the outer margin. So this is quite the find. This is actually what we're out here after today. And yet another one right down here. We've left several smaller ones behind previously, but these ones look good. And another just beautiful red-belted conk. Look at those beads of guttation. Those are the metabolites or sweat of the mushroom, thought to contain some bioactive compounds, electrolytes, all that good stuff. Here's one of the reishis that we harvested, this one relatively small. Notice there's a little bit of slug damage up top. That's something that I've been noticing out here today. Here's a smaller one that I'm not going to harvest, but look, something's been nibbling on the side. This will likely regrow just fine. But look at that, what a work of art, right? This one we can see a few spores up top. I'm going to leave this one, let it continue to grow out. Good practice just to kind of forage some and leave some behind. And it's always difficult to capture the true scale of some of these forests. But I love being in these places that make you feel so small. These older growth forests are really something to behold. And as I look around this forest, I'm spotting yet another type of conk that's fairly common out here. Look right back in there. Let's get up close to that one and take a better look. So check this out. This is what's commonly referred to as the artist conk, Ganoderma applanatum. We see some spores on this fern. Look at how the conk grew right around that fern. Isn't that something? And here's yet another artist conk growing from this snag. Check this out. So you notice the brown spores up top, firm to the touch. This is in the same genus as the reishi, but here's a good test. Take my finger, move it along, leaves a mark. And my buddy just spotted what looks to be a real prize down by the river. We're gonna go down, check it out. And take a look right down here. What a beautiful mushroom we have in front of us. So this again, of course, a shiny example of the West Coast Reishi. You know, my buddy is visiting from the Southwest, from Arizona, where he works as a doctor of naturopathic medicine. And, you know, oh, check this out. So we see a little bit of slug slime from the culprit that's been hitting our mushrooms. But Anyhow, this is obviously a mushroom that is not easy to come by down in the Southwest, and my buddy is looking to do a dual extraction of reishi, so this is exactly what we came out here to this forest for today. And what a spot these mushrooms have picked to call home. Looking up here, I got super excited when I first saw this, because I thought, is that an agaricon up there? But on closer inspection, I think that it's probably Ganoderma applanatum. I'll have to get a different angle on that to confirm one way or the other. And just taking another closer look down here, I wanted to point out, so this is of course last year's fruiting body. So this is not what we're after. It is a West Coast Reishi, but look underneath. See how it's got that browning pore surface underneath? So that's no good. That's not what we're after today. But this one, of course, a fresh fruiting body, one of the most highly coveted and medicinal mushrooms that we'll find out here. Notice that white surface underneath. A few bugs on there, but that won't bother us. This will be a nice addition to today's basket. And here's a different angle for some perspective. Let me know what you think. And take a look at this beautiful little guy hanging out with us here in the forest. I believe that what we're looking at is the caterpillar of the spotted tussock moth, which is one of our tiger moths. This guy is going to feed on primarily deciduous leaves of trees and shrubs out here in the forest. And here's an interesting little mushroom that I suppose could be confused with the chicken of the woods, or the conifer chicken of the woods. This one is what's commonly referred to as Pycnoporellus fulgens. And if we take a closer look, so notice I tore a little piece off of this one. Notice it's got this really cool, vibrant color that's kind of like this orangish yellow color. And it's got this complex sponge layer or pore layer underneath. And it kind of feels spongy. This is, again, one that we're going to see growing off of conifer wood out here in the forests of the Pacific Northwest in the late summer. So keep an eye out. Definitely an interesting one. And take a look at this. I am super excited to tell you about this plant. So this is what's commonly referred to as staghorn clubmoss, Lycopodium clavatum. And you'll notice it's got this evergreen kind of, this is also known as running clubmoss or ground pine. And these are going to have these spore-bearing cones that you see here. And if I tap this, yeah, look at this. So those are all these very fine little spores that are dropped by this club moss. And interestingly enough, this was actually, it's highly explosive. So this was used in early, like for flashes on cameras. It was used for stage acts in magic. But interestingly enough, I think you'll find this fascinating. The first ever internal combustion engine in the early 1800s actually ran on these spores. It was the motor of a boat. And so this has quite a history of use, and it's also used in homeopathic medicine. So this is one of those ones that's very common. You're going to see this in some of these older growth forests out here, and it's common worldwide, but also here in the Pacific Northwest. So if you haven't seen this one, keep an eye out. And the scale of this forest is just incredible. To give you a sense, that nurse log back there is nearly 6 feet high as it sits. And notice we've got all these blowdowns down here, and among them, we've got this big old western hemlock that you can see it's bearing, several conks, and not just a single species. So I figured this might be a good option to revisit some of these and to take a look. So if we start with this one on the left, I'm sure a lot of you recognize this. This is our red belted conk, Fomitopsis mounceae. You can hear that. Whereas if I give this one a little bang, also firm, but it's got a different kind of more hollow sound to it. This one, of course, the artist conk, Ganoderma applanatum. And notice, again, I can mark that underside. This one has that look of, like, say, stacked pancakes. And a lot of times when people see this, they want to label it as Ganoderma brownii. But it's good to know that that one, as far as I know, is restricted to deciduous trees and is somewhat more rare. And take a look at this massive old snag. So when I'm in this forest, this particular snag is typically my destination. And the reason why is because year after year, this has kicked out a tremendous volume of those West Coast Reishis. We can see last year's fruiting bodies still kind of hanging on. I visit this almost every year for several years. You can see one spot where I cut one. Oftentimes there's so much that I leave a lot of them behind. So this is oftentimes my go-to spot. But this year, it looks like it's tapped out. I'm kind of shocked that there's no new growth. So it's kind of spent all its fuel. And just down here, we've got a massive, old, blown out, somewhat disgusting bolete. I'm feared to touch this thing. Take a look. So buggy, to say the least. We can see, boy, it's just wasting away to mush. We see what is likely a bolete eater mold on there. I suspect that this is in the Caloboletus genus, one of our bitter boletes, likely Caloboletus conifericula, although, of course, it's tough to say anything with absolute certainty in this state. And if I poke at this yellow mold, again, this is one of our bolete eaters. Likely this is Hypomyces chrysospermus. So we can see some of it is white up top. Also notice the texture on that cap. That's part of what leads me to believe this is Caloboletus. And I just had to pause to admire an absolutely stunning lichen that I noticed out here. This is what's commonly referred to as Tuckerman's coral lichen, Sphaerophorus tuckermanii. And this one is super unique. So you may notice on the tips of this coral-looking lichen, there are these spherical little fruiting bodies that are on the tips out there. Those are going to split open to reveal these black spore masses, and that makes this somewhat unique. You'll typically find these growing from the bark of conifers out here in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. And just look at that, isn't that stunning? And this is typically a lichen that's going to prefer either an old growth forest or a really mature secondary growth forest. So it can be a good indicator of habitat, and it's not necessarily one that I see all that often in younger, kind of newer forests. And here's another one of my favorite ones to bump into out here. Of course, I'm presenting a terrible angle because I'm actually standing on a big downed log that has some of this growing out of the side. But this is Trembling Phlebia, Phlebia tremulosa. And you can see it just starting to pop out down here, that hairy little iridescent sheen. And all throughout this forest, there's plenty of elk sign. In fact, I just saw grazing on Devil's Club, which was quite a surprise. But notice down here in and amongst these sword ferns, I see a bolete. This is what's commonly referred to as the cracked cap bolete, Xerocamelus diffractus. This is, of course, one of our suede boletes. It's edible when young. Probably when this was younger, I'm assuming the stipe was actually reddish. But this is older in color, fun to admire, not one that we're going to bring with us today. And it's the same day, Thursday, August 28th. I'm back in my local forest after being out in the foothills earlier with my buddy. And I was out for a run. Look at what caught my eye just off to the side of the trail. Just a beautiful example of exactly what we were out there after today, the West Coast Reishi. Again, Ganoderma oregonense. And look at this, just picture perfect. You can certainly tell how it gets its other name, the varnished conk. It looks like someone came up and painted an intricate design on this thing, slapped a little lacquer on it. It's got that real shiny varnish or sheen. There's very little light in the forest right now. It's kind of later in the evening. But what little light is there, it's really catching it. You can see it just shining or glimmering here. I actually handed off all the reishi that we harvested earlier today to my buddy so that he could use that for this dual extraction. And this one I happened to stumble across, but boy, it's looking so perfect that I don't know that I can bring myself to forage it just yet. It has yet to spore out, and it just looks too perfect. So if you're out here in the Pacific Northwest, be checking those western hemlocks, because boy, these West Coast Reishis are really out right now. And if you didn't get a chance to check out the video that I put out last year specifically on the West Coast Reishi, give it a look. I'll link it here. Hope that you enjoyed this episode of Mushroom Trail. And until next time, happy trails.